Picture this. You're not starting over. You're just slipping. One late paycheck, one emergency room bill, one breakup, one rent increase you can't outrun. Now here's the unsettling part. In a country as wealthy as the United States, that kind of slip is reaching more people. So tonight, we're not doing a who's to blame video. We're doing a what changed video. Because when homelessness rises fast, it's rarely one cause. It's usually a stack of pressures, hitting the same households at the same time. Once a year, the United States takes a nationwide snapshot of homelessness during the last 10 days of January. It's imperfect. Any one-night count can miss people. But it's the main federal baseline for tracking change over time. In the 2024 snapshot, the federal count reached 771,480 people in one night. That's about 23 out of every 10,000 people. And the Housing Department described roughly an 18% rise from the previous year. So the question is, what makes a modern country suddenly look like it's losing housing stability at this scale? First twist. Homelessness isn't a type of person. It's what you see when stability becomes fragile for a lot of people at once. The federal report points to multiple pressures behind that peak. A worsening affordable housing crisis, inflation, stagnating wages for many households, and the persisting effects of systemic racism, plus shocks like natural disasters, public health crises, and the end of some COVID-era prevention programs, including the expanded child tax credit. And here's what politics means in this story, plainly. It's the public decisions that shape these conditions. What gets funded? What gets enforced? And what happens when local systems are overwhelmed? Those choices determine how wide the safety margin is, and how many people live without one. Start with the biggest engine. Housing. Stability is a buffer. High housing costs eat the buffer. And when the buffer disappears, normal life events start behaving like disasters. Ask yourself, how many people can handle one shock right now? A missed shift, a sick kid, a car repair, a sudden fee. If the answer is not many, then homelessness rises, even among people doing their best. In a tight housing market, effort helps. But effort can't replace a missing safety margin. Second twist. Homelessness isn't one reality. Most people picture tents and sidewalks. But the federal count includes people outside and people in shelters or temporary programs. A congressional research summary breaks 2024 down like this. 771,480 total. 497,256 sheltered. 274,224 unsheltered. Why does that matter? Because sheltered homelessness is tightly connected to local capacity. Beds, staff, rules, funding, turnover, and local systems don't fail in slow motion. They jam. Here's the hidden mechanics of a sudden surge. A city can absorb hardship quietly for a while. People double up. They couch surf. They sleep in a car, just for a week. Shelters run near full. Services stretch. But when housing is tight, the exit narrows. People can't move out of shelter because there's nowhere affordable to move into. So stays get longer. Beds turn over slower. And when turnover slows, the line grows fast. The explosion is often this: a capacity system hitting its limit. Now a sensitive layer because it's easy to misunderstand. Between 2022 and 2024, some places saw unusually sharp increases in people staying in shelters, driven by highly localized surges in need that stressed shelter capacity. This is not a national one-cause explanation for homelessness. It helps explain why a few places saw unusually sharp increases in sheltered homelessness. A 2025 working paper from the University of Chicago's Becker Friedman Institute emphasizes that this shelter increase was highly concentrated in 4 localities. The takeaway isn't blame. It's capacity. How fast a local emergency system can be overwhelmed when housing is scarce. The federal report also points to another kind of shock: natural disasters. Disasters displace people quickly. They tighten housing markets quickly. And in already tight markets, the lowest cost options disappear first. So the people closest to the edge get pushed first. Now we reach the part that makes homelessness hard to escape. Once someone is homeless, the condition itself can multiply instability. Sleep becomes a problem. Safety becomes a problem. Keeping documents becomes a problem. Keeping a phone charged becomes a problem. Staying reachable becomes a problem. Losing an address sounds small. until you notice how many systems quietly require one. Work forms, school forms, medical forms, appointments, mail, benefits, banking. So homelessness isn't just the absence of a home. It's the loss of the tools you normally use to rebuild. Then the crisis enters its most political stage, the street. When homelessness becomes visible in public space, the debate splits into two moral languages. One side says order, clean streets, safety, parks, sidewalks, businesses, schools. The other side says rights, dignity, survival, and the question, where are people supposed to go? This conflict reached the United States Supreme Court in a case called City of Grants Pass versus Johnson, decided on June 28, 2024. In plain terms, the court rejected the argument that enforcing generally applicable camping bans is cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment in that case. So when housing fails at scale, cities increasingly manage the consequences in public space through rules, enforcement, and conflict. Another layer the federal report names is the persisting effects of systemic racism. It notes that Black people are overrepresented among those experiencing homelessness, compared with their share of the national population. This matters because risk isn't evenly shared. Over time, unequal exposure to eviction pressure, financial instability, and neighborhood disinvestment can accumulate, until one shock is enough to break stability. Homelessness doesn't land randomly. It tends to follow the fault lines a society already built. So why does it feel like homelessness is exploding? Because multiple waves are colliding. A housing market where affordability is breaking down. Economic pressure, especially inflation and wage strain for many households. Local systems hitting capacity limits, visible in the sheltered versus unsheltered split. Local shocks like disasters, and in a small number of places, unusually concentrated shelter demand pressures. And political conflict over public space, intensified by legal decisions and enforcement choices. Stack those layers, and more people lose the margin that keeps a life stable. Until a single shock is enough. Here's the line to remember. When stability is thin, small shocks create big fallout. So don't start with, what's wrong with them? Start with, what changed in the system that made falling this easy?